In the Brendan Banfield case, the lines between love, trust, and betrayal were all pushed to the breaking point. The jury gave us their verdict, but that trial didn't answer all our questions, not for a long shot. Only 4 people know exactly what happened that fateful February morning. 2 of them are dead, 1 admitted her guilt, and through their verdict, the jury told Brendan Banfield they didn't buy his elaborate story that he heroically tried to save his wife after walking in on her, playing out a sexual fetish fantasy with a stranger. I'm Ted Oberg. For more context on the case, we turn to our 2 experts who heard almost every word of this trial and covered it for months before. Joining me, Erica Gonzalez and Drew Wilder. I know you guys have covered this case for a long time, 3 years from the time of the crime nearly to the time of the verdict. But I wonder, as this trial sort of crystallized this case, Erica, tell me about the moment in the testimony where you really sort of sat up and it got your attention, and how that connected with the jury.
I think there are a couple of key points, and I think they really all revolve around Brendan. It may not necessarily be him speaking, but they revolve around him. First and foremost, it's when Juliana Perez Magalhães, the au pair, walks into the room, and it's Brendan's facial expressions, right? So this is presumably the first time that they've seen each other in I don't know how many years.
2 years.
And look at the longing stare. And he cannot take his eyes off of her. And there's a point initially where he sort of tries, but he doesn't look at anybody else on the stand the way he looks at her. He cannot take his eyes off of her. And that, to me,
A woman he confessed to being in love with,
correct,
right? Yeah,
right.
okay.
But he doesn't look at anybody else. His father-in-law was on the stand as well. He didn't even look at the father-in-law. And this was a gaze that he could not remove.
Drew, did the jury pick up on that?
They had to pick up on it. I mean, this was a guy who had his eyes down pretty much the entire time, but he's locked on her, and you wonder when you're watching this piece of video, is he looking at her because he's gushing over her, or is he looking at her because this is a woman who's about to take the stand and accuse him of plotting a double murder? You couldn't really pick up what his emotion was at that point. And then later when he took the stand, of course, it was pretty clear what his emotion was. I mean, this guy was smitten for Juliana. Oh my goodness. When he was on the witness stand testifying and he brought her name up, he looked like a boy in love.
I will say that's one of the other things that stood out to me, and not just to me, but this is to our viewers who were chiming in on our live blog and our YouTube stream. When he gets on the stand and he starts recounting his affair with Juliana, people were saying, is he smirking? Is he smirking? Is he smiling? There was no reaction when he talked about his wife of 19 years and how she was bludgeoned to death. And when he talks about the au pair, you can see a levity in him. That was remarkable. And then it's when the prosecutor gets her opportunity to question him.
Sure.
The defense, I think, really tried to make an effort to air his dirty laundry so that there were no surprises. The prosecutor, in turn, took that dirty laundry and made it smell, made it stink, okay? About those affairs. So this person that you cheated on your wife with, let's listen.
You've had multiple affairs, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and one of those affairs was with a woman named Danielle, who you met on a fetish site searching for sugar babies. Is that correct?
I would not call it a fetish site.
Okay, what would you call it?
An arranged relationship.
Okay, but you were looking for someone to be your sugar baby?
I guess it was a relationship where they would already know that I was married. That was what I was looking for.
Okay. Another one of your affairs was with your best friend's wife. Is that correct?
No. First, he's not my best friend. Number 2, they were not married. They were not even together at that point.
Okay, but you were married at that point.
Yes, I was married at that point.
And again, you describe here in the very first paragraph-ish, you came here and we fell in love. But you're suggesting that that love didn't happen until after Christine was dead?
As I said, that we did have feelings for each other prior, but I would not describe them as the level of feelings that I had for my wife of 19 years.
Mr. Banfield, this one's 14 pages, so I'm not going to belabor this, but this is another love letter to Juliana. Is that accurate?
It looks that way.
And in this one, you're discussing baby names for your future children with her.
That is something that you wanted to talk about.
Erica, not an admission of murder, but you just don't like the guy.
But I think what it also did, Ted, in that moment, is it planted the seed of doubt in the jurors. If somebody can find not a sex fetish website, a sugar baby website, if he could be capable of finding that website, he might be capable of finding a FetLife website.
It maybe gives them a little bit of motive too. You don't need to prove motive to prove guilt, but a prosecutor is always looking for motive or maybe a couple of ideas of motive, and that certainly gave the jury the idea of motive. Get the wife out of the picture so he could be with the au pair.
It's also, why correct those things? Almost as if he believes he is the smartest person in the room, trying to convince the jury of what they ultimately believed, that he was a killer.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Erica's point was fantastic, that he's trying to air his dirty laundry. Like, okay, I did some things that weren't great. Does that make me a killer?
Yep.
But when he did that, he didn't have anything that he also offered them to suggest that he wasn't trying to get his wife out of the picture.
Drew, take me inside the courtroom to the moment where that some of this crystallizes for you as well.
Right, so I mean, Erica's point is fantastic. It all centers around Brendan, and he doesn't remove the possibility that he could be a cold-blooded killer to the jury. And then we had a lot of days of what you would call kind of boring evidence that's being presented, but it really started to piece together what could have taken place in this whole idea of the catfish theory, and whether or not it was Brendan and Juliana who built this online dating profile pretending to be the wife Christine in an effort to lure Joseph Ryan over to the house. If you can prove the catfish theory, if you can convince the jury that it was Brendan who set up this fake online profile on the BDSM dating website, then you kind of get the jury there. So they were able to do this through some really dry digital evidence. They were looking at cell phones and laptops. Who might have been using Christine's cell phone and her laptop to communicate with Joe Ryan through this FetLife website? And if you can't exactly determine who's on the other end of a keyboard, well, was Brendan Banfield's cell phone in the house while this was happening? Was Juliana's cell phone in the house while all of this is happening? And there was a really, really strong moment in which the defense is trying to say, look, we think it was Christine the whole time. And then they were able to prove through the location data within cell phones that either Brendan or Juliana was home every single time that the FetLife account was accessed. Listen to this excerpt from the trial.
There were 2 occasions where the co-defendants were out of town for 48 to 36 hours, and none of the accounts, the CB 920 at Gmail wasn't used, the FetLife account wasn't used, the Telegram account wasn't used. It seemed unusual to me that that wouldn't happen while they were out of the house. We reviewed Christine's history. I think it went back to the mid-2000s. She had never so much as visited a porn site that we could find.
Drew, tell me who that witness was. What's their expertise and who put them on the stand? Right,
so he used to be the head of the Fairfax County Major Crimes Bureau. He was the head of the Fairfax County Major Crimes Bureau at the time of this investigation. He is no longer with the department. So he had all of the top knowledge of this investigation really up until it started to get to court.
And who would put him on the stand to testify to this stuff?
Right, so it was kind of interesting the way this came up, because this is the defense that's trying to put him on the stand and say, hey, here's a guy who was very actively involved in this double homicide, who was leading in part the investigation, or the lead investigators were at least bringing and reporting their evidence to him, and he resigned. And the defense is trying to say, look, you had the lead detective on this huge case, reassigned. You had a forensic detective reassigned off this case. This guy is the one who shifted them around, and now he's out, and they're trying to say, look, there's a mess going on inside Fairfax County Police, and this guy's...
Yeah. You and I talked about that in the lead up to this trial.
Right.
Did it ever go anywhere? Did it ever get to a spot where the jury could believe, okay, this is muddy enough to equal reasonable doubt?
Look, it doesn't take away from what might have happened inside the Banfield bedroom, right? And to your point earlier, right, even with the questions of this affair and was there motive, was there not motive with all of these love letters, that might play in a little bit, but it doesn't change what the jury thinks happened inside of that bedroom. Yeah. Look, it was a fair attempt, I think, by the defense. There was some argument that the defense didn't really have a lot to go off of. Whether or not they believe it was messy inside Fairfax County Police wasn't enough to convince them that Brendan Banfield wasn't guilty of these two murders.
We've talked some about Brendan's testimony. I want to ask you about when the au pair is on the stand, right? I think in the newsroom, we all watched that very closely. Was the deal with her worth it, you think? How did the jury see her?
The plea agreement that she accepted in exchange for her testimony. Look, I don't know if they get a conviction without her. Prosecutors and Fairfax County Police are confident that they would have convicted Brendan Banfield without Juliana's testimony. I don't know how you get there, right? Because you have all of this digital evidence that isn't exactly a smoking gun. Yeah, you've got some blood evidence, but they had multiple experts on the witness stand on different days saying, well, we look at this blood evidence and draw the complete opposite conclusion. Juliana is the only person in this case that connects the dots for the jury, that adds a narrative, that adds a story, that folds all of it together. I just don't know how they get a conviction on Brendan without her testimony. Now, prosecutors were asked, like, did you offer her too sweet of a deal? They don't seem to think it's that sweet of a deal. I know a lot of people that were commenting online thought it was a pretty cushy deal. I mean, this is somebody who admitted to committing murder.
Right.
And at most, she'll serve 10 years in prison, and then she'll be deported out of the country, but she's going to go back home to where her mother lives in Brazil.
But I think with her testimony, there were instances where it was clear, and Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, our NBC News legal analyst, did a beautiful job of explaining this to us, in that you may not like her, but do you believe her?
Right.
And I think there were a couple of instances where the jury might be able to say, that doesn't sound quite right, or that didn't check out from the previous account. There were some holes or some inconsistencies in her stories. Where I think the pieces started to come together is when you hear Juliana's account. Then you hear the body camera video of Brendan Banfield at the hospital and the attending physician saying, we're sorry to tell you that your wife has died. She died of blood loss. Okay? And then it's like, oh my gosh, then that third piece is why they were so finite in their witness testimony, or excuse me, the father, Christine's father, taking the stand and solely asking him about a blood disorder. Because presumably then, if Brendan Banfield and his wife and her family know that she has a blood disorder, and the attending physician has just said, your wife bled out, and then Annie said, oh, when they looked at each other, when he was stabbing her, when he was looking over her, she said, just let me go. I'm going to die anyways. Just let me go. And it was like in that moment, you were like, I see the pieces coming together now. They knew that she would bleed out.
Right. That I think goes to sort of just how calculated this was. And I think that's one of the reasons people sort of grabbed onto this case, right, and wanted to know so many details. I think it's hard to believe that your neighbor, any of our neighbors, would be capable of doing something like this, of being this calculated, of really sort of being a true life villain among us, right? But why do you think this case attracted so much attention hour by hour? I mean, you saw the comments from our viewers and our partners in all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that, right? I mean, it was how salacious this story was. Look, Brendan Banfield was a federal law enforcement agent. This guy carried a gun for the IRS. So you kind of have that creating a character for people who are watching this from afar, right? Not to characterize them in exactly that way. But when you look at him like that, you've got this au pair from outside of the country. You've got a wife who's a pediatric ICU nurse. The victim here who, by profession is doing one of the most noble jobs that I think anybody in our community could do. That in and of itself. And then you fold in all of the backstory, all of the details, all of the planning that had to go into something like this. And it's just disgusting.
Well, I think it was the weight in the lead up to an arrest in this, right? So you have sex and scandal, and then there's no arrests for months.
To whodunit.
Exactly, to who did it. But I think the other thing, too, that was interesting here, and I think for an area that has a lot of professionals that have very demanding jobs, people in this area, I think, are familiar with what an au pair is, what that program enables a family to perhaps have some more flexibility in their childcare hours. And so I think when people heard au pair, it might be familiar to them. And so I think that was another draw in this.
It's also yet another stereotype, right? That a suburban husband falls in love with the international au pair, and all of this comes out. One of the questions that was most interesting in the lead up to all of this, and I'm curious if Juliana ever gets into this, is how she makes that decision to be all in. Did we ever hear that?
We never really did. It just kind of sounded like a flip switch. I mean, when she talks about, first moving in with the Banfields and starting her career with that family, it sounds like the majority of her relationship is actually with Christine. I mean, Christine's handling the business end of the au pair. Most of the communication about what they're going to do with the young daughter on any given day is through Christine. And then it's just kind of one day something flips. And if you believe Brendan, he tells this story of Juliana just kind of coming on to him one night and I don't think anybody believes that's exactly how that really panned out. But
well, I mean, I could quote you that testimony. I mean, she was basically describing me, he said.
Right.
And that
in her online dating app.
In her
the other men
online
she was
dating profile. And again, when he gets on the stand, I think for people that thought televised courtroom drama, and they were expecting to see these fiery attorneys going back and forth, and that was lacking. I think if people were expecting this very fiery defense attorney to go off and create sparks, that didn't happen with John Carroll, but it happened with Brendan Banfield in the form of an implosion.
Right.
Yeah. Were you surprised by that?
I don't know if I'm surprised by anything in a courtroom. I'm surprised when a defendant takes the stand in their own defense, because that is a clear indication of a Hail Mary. A defendant is not required to testify in their own defense, and a jury is not allowed to read into that anything whatsoever.
Or a defendant who believes he can truly convince anyone of anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen, we were both watching this, and Brendan is taking copious notes throughout the trial, and he's leaning over and he's talking to John Carroll. And it felt very much like he was driving the car. And perhaps whether or not John Carroll wanted to make that play, it seems like Brendan made that flex.
Let me switch gears just a little bit. The FBI says about 1,700 women are killed by their intimate partners every year. This is unfortunately a case where that plays out. And look, there are a million reasons, we've talked about a lot of them, why this case gets so much coverage. But how do we as a newsroom make sure that the other similar victims in our area get the same kind of attention, to make sure that law enforcement is paying enough attention to those cases and that their families get to remember their loved ones in the same way?
I'm going to say it starts with core and root journalism. You've had Drew, who has been on this case for 3 years. This isn't, he started the story, he turned a story one night at 6 o'clock and then it was left alone. Drew and his dogged reporting were after this for 3 years. That speaks to the quality journalism that we have, and so many of the newsrooms around the country have, and unfortunately are taking cuts and hits every day, but that's part of that.
Yeah, and we talked about, I think, a lot of the reasons why this probably blew up. And a lot of times when we're reporting on these types of crimes, we're looking more often than an individual case like this at trends, right? I know that's a lot of what you guys do on the I-Team, right? So how can we report on these trends and much larger societal issues and make sure that we are putting the victims and the victims' families first in our reporting, and also trying to, make sure we're giving voice to potential solutions or ideas or places where people can go for help if they are experiencing some type of crisis, if they are feeling like they need to reach out and flag something before a bad situation turns worse.
In our remaining seconds, I want to remind viewers that Brendan set to be sentenced this spring. No choice, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. But I think the one remaining question is what happens to their daughter. She lost her mother that day. Her father will spend the rest of his life in prison. At some point, she'll learn why. And what the jury said her dad's involvement was in all of that. How often did you see her at court, and what's the expectation in your mind of how she is raised.
Right. She was not there in court. It was a decision that was made pre-trial that she was not going to testify, that she would not be allowed to be called as a witness, and there were some discussions about whether or not they use in interviews that she conducted with police along the way. That ultimately was not allowed either. Brendan at one point asked the court to even keep the daughter's name out of the trial completely. The judge didn't acquiesce that because she's clearly one of the centerpieces of this trial, because she is the victim that is going to suffer the worst. And it's, I mean, your heart just breaks for her, you know, and the way that she's going to grow up, and eventually, Ted, to your point about how she's going to come to learn about, you know, why she doesn't have a mom and dad
You
at
know,
home.
we're all parents here in this room, and you can go home and you can sit at your kitchen table and do homework with your daughters.
Yeah.
And for whatever Brendan said on the stand, he said, I do math worksheets with my kid from jail. Like that, you know, that sticks with you. You remember that, and you think this little girl her life is forever upended. Not
by decisions that she made at all.
No.
Erica and Drew, thanks for talking to me, but more importantly for 3 years of work. I mean, this was a long project for both of you, and I think we're the beneficiaries of that. So thank you both very much. If you liked this conversation, and we hope you did, there's a ton more of our coverage on this case available at the NBC Washington YouTube page. We do hope you'll check it out, like the page, subscribe to it, comment on it. You got a couple people here who can't wait to comment back. I'm Ted Oberg from the News 4 I team. I'll be here working for you.